Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, you will uncover hidden teachings that have guided seekers for thousands of years toward the profound rest that comes from true understanding. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm about to share a collection of enlightening Zen stories that hold the keys to inner freedom and lasting tranquility. Each ancient tale carries within it a powerful insight that can completely transform how you experience worry, frustration, restless thinking, and the endless search for something more. These are not simple stories, but lost teachings from enlightened masters who discovered something extraordinary. That genuine peace doesn't require perfect circumstances, but rather a shift in how we meet whatever life presents. The Buddha revealed this truth when he said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." Through our exploration together, you'll discover how this timeless wisdom can revolutionize your inner world. As we move through these profound teachings, you'll feel something powerful taking place. The weight of your concerns will begin to dissolve. The constant stream of mental chatter will gradually fade. You'll find yourself naturally arriving at a place of deep understanding and complete rest. So allow yourself to settle completely now. Let your entire being relax into this moment. Breathe with me once, deeply, and as you release that breath, know that you're about to receive ancient wisdom that has been quietly waiting to find you. Let us begin with a story about the impermanence of all teachings. This is the story of the riverbed letters. In a mountain village, where a crystal river wound through ancient pines, there lived a scribe named May, who devoted her life to copying sacred sutras for traveling pilgrims. Her small hut smelled of pine smoke and ink, and her calligraphy was renowned throughout the region for its clarity and beauty. Each morning, travelers would arrive dusty from mountain paths, seeking a line of wisdom to carry them through their journeys. One summer, illness struck the village papermaker, and suddenly there was no paper to be found anywhere. Yet still the pilgrims came, weary and seeking guidance. May sat in her empty workshop, surrounded by brushes and inkstones, but unable to fulfill her purpose. The absence of paper felt like a wall between her and her calling. On the third morning, without paper, May walked to the river at dawn. Standing barefoot on the smooth stones, she selected a flat rock from the shallows, dried it carefully on her sleeve, and wrote a single character with lampblack and water: peace. She placed the stone gently back into the flowing water. Her young apprentice, Jin, discovered her there and was troubled. "Master," he said, "the words will wash away. They won't last even until sunset." May dipped her brush again and wrote breath on another stone. "The river reads quickly," she replied, returning the stone to the current. Each morning thereafter, May continued this practice. She wrote different characters on different stones: heart, return, stillness, flow. Each stone was carefully placed back into the water, where the current gradually erased the ink and carried the teachings downstream. Jin grew increasingly distressed. "Master, we are losing all the wisdom. These words should be preserved." One evening, heavy rains swept over the mountains. The river rose and swallowed all the stones at once. Jin rushed to rescue them, but May placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Let the lesson go home," she said quietly. The next day, when the waters cleared, Jin searched frantically for the stones. Every character had been washed clean. He sat beside May, dejected. We have lost 100 sacred words. May smiled with deep peace. We have gained a river that has read them all. They walked along the bank together in silence. Jin began to notice how the water curved around obstacles without resistance, how it carried both leaves and branches with equal grace, how it reflected light the same whether it flowed over golden sand or dark stones. For the first time, he was reading the water itself. "Master," he whispered, "how do I learn this older script?" "Begin where it touches your feet," May answered. The Buddha once said, "Nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming." This ancient wisdom illuminates a profound truth about our relationship with spiritual teachings and the nature of wisdom itself. Why do we cling so desperately to preserving teachings in permanent forms? Buddhism reveals several layers to our attachment to permanence. First is our deep fear of loss, the ego's terror that without constant grasping and preserving, something essential will slip away. We imagine that wisdom exists only in the words themselves, rather than in our capacity to embody and live them. Second is our misunderstanding of how wisdom actually transmits. We believe that truth must be captured, stored, and accumulated like treasures in a vault. But authentic spiritual understanding cannot be hoarded. It lives only in the direct experience of each moment, like words written on water that serve their purpose and dissolve. Third is our confusion between the container and the content. The sutra is not the wisdom. It points toward wisdom. The stone is not the teaching. It carries the teaching temporarily. When we become attached to the forms, we miss the living essence they're meant to convey. Consider your own relationship with spiritual knowledge. How often do you collect teachings, books, quotes, and insights, believing that accumulating them will bring you closer to enlightenment? Notice the subtle anxiety that arises when you can't remember a particular teaching or when your notes get lost. This is the same attachment Jin felt watching the characters wash away. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The river in May's story represents this principle perfectly. It reads each teaching completely, absorbs its essence, and lets the form dissolve. This is how we must approach spiritual practice, with total attention followed by complete release. The deeper teaching here shows us that the most profound wisdom cannot be preserved in external forms, because it lives in the dynamic flow of present moment awareness. Just as the river embodies fluidity, acceptance, and constant change, we too must learn to receive teachings fully and then let them flow through us, rather than crystallizing them into fixed concepts. When we truly understand a teaching, it becomes part of us like water absorbed by earth. We no longer need to grasp the words because we have become the wisdom they pointed toward. The apprentice Jin had to learn that wisdom is not about collecting and preserving insights, but about developing the capacity to read the world directly, to see the Dharma in every moment. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron reminds us, the root of suffering is resisting the certainty that no matter what the circumstances, uncertainty is all we truly have. May's practice of writing on water stones teaches us to find peace with this uncertainty. to trust that wisdom will arise fresh in each moment, rather than depending on our ability to store it. The Buddha taught, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at another. You are the one who gets burned. This same principle applies to our grasping of spiritual insights. When we try too hard to possess wisdom, we burn ourselves with the tension of attachment and miss the natural flow of understanding. Tonight, as you reflect on the teachings you've encountered today, can you hold them lightly, like May held her brush? Can you trust that the wisdom you need will arise naturally from your direct engagement with life, like reading the current with your own feet, rather than depending on words written by others? As the Buddha said, all formations are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. The teachings will come and go like words on waterstones, but your awakened awareness can learn to read the eternal scripture written by life itself. As we continue our journey through Zen wisdom, let us turn to a tale about the true nature of support. This is the story of the cloud pillow. On a narrow street where morning mist gathered against old wooden buildings, there stood a small shop run by an elderly woman named Sora. Her pillows were renowned throughout the town for their remarkable quality of rest. People said that sleeping on one of Sora's pillows allowed dreams to complete themselves naturally, without the tangled urgency that plagued most modern sleep. One day, a successful merchant arrived at her shop, his face tight with stress and his hands clenched into perpetual fists. "I haven't slept properly in months," he complained. "I wake up every few hours with my jaw locked and my hands cramped. Your pillows are too soft. I need something firm, something that will hold me." Sora nodded thoughtfully and crafted him a pillow stuffed densely with buckwheat hulls. The merchant returned within days, still exhausted. "Firmer," he demanded. "I need more support." Sora created increasingly dense pillows until the final one felt like a brick wrapped in silk. The merchant took it home hopefully, but returned the next morning looking haggard. "I feel like I'm fighting the pillow all night," he said, his voice strained. "It's not holding me, it's pushing back." That evening, Sora sat by her window as fog thickened into a soft wall of grey. She placed one of her own pillows on her lap, pressed her palms into it, then lifted them and watched the fabric slowly rise, as if breathing itself back to fullness. A child from the neighboring house wandered in, his chin sticky with juice from a plum. "Why do people buy pillows?" he asked, with the directness children possess. "To rest their heads," Sora replied simply. The child tilted his head thoughtfully. "But where does the head rest when there's no pillow?" Sora looked out at the evening mist. On the sky itself. The next morning, inspired by this innocent wisdom, Sora created something entirely different. She sewed together 2 layers of the softest cloth, added only a whisper of cotton, and created a small pocket filled with nothing but air. The seams were loose, offering gentle suggestion rather than rigid structure. On this pocket of emptiness, she embroidered a tiny cloud. When the merchant returned, he scoffed at the nearly weightless pillow. "This is empty. There's nothing here to support me." Sora met his eyes with gentle understanding. "Try returning your head to where it came from," she suggested. The merchant laughed dismissively, but took the pillow home. That night, having nothing firm to grip or fight against, his hands naturally opened. The pillow yielded completely, then met his head with just enough presence to remind him he was supported. For the first time in months, he felt the space beneath his skull and the weight of his breath settling through his jaw. His racing thoughts slowed, having nowhere to dig in and take hold. He slept deeply and woke refreshed. Returning to Sora's shop, his eyes were soft with wonder. "Your pillow feels blank," he said, "like it has no opinions about how I should rest." Sora nodded knowingly. It lets the night write its own story. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the difference between support that constrains and support that liberates. Why do we so often seek the wrong kind of support in our lives? Zen Buddhism reveals that our conditioning teaches us to equate strength with rigidity and security with control. We seek pillows that will force us into specific positions, rather than ones that allow us to find our natural rest. This same pattern appears throughout our spiritual and emotional lives. When we experience anxiety, we often try to construct elaborate mental supports, rigid belief systems, or controlling behaviors that we imagine will hold us steady. But like the merchant's brick pillow, these create tension rather than ease. Consider your own relationship with support. When you're emotionally upset, do you seek comfort that allows you to soften into your experience, or do you grasp for distractions and rigid thinking that promise to keep you propped up? Notice how often we resist the spaciousness that would actually support us, mistaking emptiness for abandonment. The cloud pillow represents what Zen calls supportive emptiness. This is space that holds without grasping, presence that sustains without controlling. It's the quality of awareness that allows whatever arises to be exactly as it is, while providing a foundation of unconditional acceptance. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi spoke of "don't know mind," the quality of consciousness that remains open and responsive rather than fixed in particular positions. The cloud pillow embodies this perfectly, offering support that adapts to whatever position we naturally take, rather than forcing us into predetermined shapes. In meditation practice, we learn to rest our attention in this same quality of supportive space. We don't try to eliminate thoughts or feelings, which would be like stuffing the pillow with stones. Instead, we provide a gentle, spacious awareness that allows everything to settle naturally. The child's question, "Where does the head rest when there's no pillow?" points toward a profound truth. Our deepest rest comes not from external supports, but from recognizing the vast space of awareness that is always present. This is what Sora meant by resting on the sky itself, the limitless openness that needs no manufactured support because it is support itself. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "We have enough to be happy right here, right now." The merchant's tight fists represented his belief that happiness required grasping and controlling his experience. Only when he learned to open his hands could he receive the natural support that was always available. Buddhist psychology explains that our suffering often comes from what's called the second arrow, our resistance to our actual experience. The merchant's original tiredness was one thing. His tight grip on needing to control his sleep was the additional suffering he created. The cloud pillow taught him to receive his tiredness with gentleness, rather than fight it with force. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, notice the quality of support you seek. Are you trying to force your mind into a particular state? Or can you allow it to settle naturally into the spacious awareness that is always present? Can you rest your concerns on the vast sky of consciousness rather than the small, hard pillows of worry and control? As the Buddha taught, drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good. True support accumulates gradually through our willingness to rest in openness rather than demanding immediate, rigid solutions. Let us now turn to a story about the wisdom of silence. This is the tale of the reed that would not sing. In a peaceful monastery surrounded by wetlands, a young monk named Ren had the daily task of cutting reeds to make flutes for evening prayers. Each reed was carefully selected, numbered, and crafted with devotion. The monastery's chanting was enhanced by these simple instruments, their clear voices rising with the incense toward the wooden rafters. Ren took pride in his work. The first 13 reeds he prepared sang beautifully, each one contributing its voice to the sacred music. But the 14th reed proved stubborn. No matter how carefully Ren shaped it, adjusted the finger holes, or thinned the walls, reed 14 refused to produce any recognizable note. It hissed, squeaked, and wheezed, then settled into complete silence. Frustrated, Ren prepared to discard the useless reed, but an elderly nun named Etsu, who had been sweeping nearby, quietly gathered it up. "Not every reed is meant to speak in the same way," she observed gently. "But all reeds should sing when breath passes through them," Ren protested. "That's their purpose." Etsu handed the silent reed back to him. "Perhaps this one has a different teaching to offer. Try listening when the wind asks rather than when you demand." That evening, Ren sat by the marsh with reed 14, watching dragonflies stitch patterns in the air above the water. As twilight deepened, a breeze moved across the wetlands, causing the living reeds to whisper and sway. Ren held the silent flute to his ear instead of his lips. At first he heard nothing, then gradually became aware of the small sound of his own blood moving through his veins. A frog plucked a single note from the shore. Water lapped against the muddy bank with quiet rhythm. His breathing slowed until it matched the gentle pulse of the marsh itself. When the bell called monks to evening prayer, Ren brought reed 14 with him. As the other flutes began their familiar melodies, Ren did not blow into his instrument. Instead, he held it to his ear and listened deeply to the music being created around him. He heard the soft settling of sandals on wooden floors, the whisper of robes, someone's quiet stomach, and the spaces between each sung syllable. He felt how the sound moved after leaving mouths, how it entered the stone pillars and wooden beams, how it dissolved into the night air. After the chanting ended, Etsu approached him. "How did reed 14 perform tonight?" "It taught me the rest of the music," Ren answered with newfound understanding. From that day forward, Ren carried the silent reed everywhere. When young monks criticized themselves for singing off-key, he would place reed 14 against their chests and say, "Listen here, you're perfectly in tune with your own heartbeat." When strong winds made playing difficult, instead of forcing the flutes to compete, he would listen to how the wind composed its own music through roof tiles and pine branches. Word of the silent flute reached a renowned musician who traveled from the capital to investigate. "Let me hear this instrument that has no voice," she requested. She held reed 14 to her ear, and closed her eyes in concentration. After several minutes, she smiled with recognition. It's a perfect teacher. It doesn't flatter you with echoes of your own breath. As the Buddha observed, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. What emerges from this story is the profound difference between noise and communication, between speaking and truly listening. Why do we struggle so deeply with silence? Buddhist psychology reveals that our minds are conditioned to equate value with output, productivity with sound. We live in a world that rewards constant speech, endless commentary, and the ability to fill every space with words or music. Silence makes us uncomfortable because it offers no distraction from direct encounter with reality. Our resistance to silence stems from several sources. First is our fear of emptiness, the ego's terror of spaces that cannot be controlled or filled with familiar content. We mistake silence for absence rather than recognizing it as the pregnant fullness from which all sound arises. Second is our addiction to self-expression. We believe our worth comes from what we contribute vocally to the world, failing to recognize the profound contribution of deep listening. Like Ren trying to force Reed 14 to sing, we push ourselves to perform rather than discovering what wants to emerge naturally. Third is our inability to perceive subtlety. Our attention has become so coarse that we can only notice dramatic sounds while missing the symphony of small voices that speak constantly beneath the surface of our awareness. Consider your own relationship with silence. When was the last time you sat quietly without any agenda to produce thoughts, insights, or solutions? Notice how quickly the mind rushes to fill empty spaces with commentary, planning, or entertainment. This is the same impulse that made Ren want to discard the silent reed. Reed 14 represents what Zen calls original silence, the spacious awareness that exists before and after all words. This is not the silence of suppression or emptiness, but the full, pregnant silence that contains infinite possibility. It's the silence between heartbeats that allows the heart to function, the pause between breaths that makes breathing possible. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." Reed 14 appeared broken to Ren's thinking mind, but revealed profound wisdom to his listening heart. Sometimes our greatest teachers come disguised as failures or inadequacies. In meditation practice, we learn to value the silent reed of awareness that simply listens without needing to comment, judge, or produce insights. This quality of receptive attention allows us to hear what's actually happening rather than what we think should be happening. The Buddha said, "Silence is an empty space, and in empty space, wisdom grows." When we stop trying to fill every moment with our own voice, we discover the vast conversation already taking place. We hear the wisdom of our body, the intelligence of our breath, the subtle guidance of intuition. Modern life provides fewer and fewer opportunities for genuine silence. We're surrounded by constant input designed to capture our attention and prevent us from settling into the deeper listening that Reed 14 represents. But even in noise, we can cultivate the inner silence that hears beneath surface sounds. The musician's observation that Reed 14 doesn't flatter you with echoes of your own breath points toward a crucial spiritual principle. True wisdom often comes not from confirmation of our existing thoughts, but from the silence that allows fresh understanding to emerge. Tonight, as you notice the impulse to fill quiet moments with activity or thinking, remember Read 14. Can you hold space for the silence that teaches without words? Can you listen with your whole being to the music that plays constantly beneath the noise of daily life? The Buddha taught, peace comes from within, do not seek it without. The deepest peace is found not in the perfect harmony of all our reeds singing together, but in the silence that allows us to hear the symphony of existence of which we are already a part. Our next story reveals the profound nature of practice itself. This is the story of the charcoal moon. In a small mining town nestled at the foot of a blackened mountain, a solitary charcoal burner named Ko spent his days tending fires that transformed wood into fuel. His modest hut was permeated with the scent of pine tar and wood smoke, and his hands were permanently stained dark from his work. Each evening, after banking the coals for the night, Ko would take a piece of charcoal and carefully draw a circle on the soot-darkened wall of his hut. The circle was never perfect. Some nights, his tired hands made it wobbly. Other evenings, when he felt centered and still, the line flowed smooth and round. During thunderstorms, the circle trembled with the shaking of the hut. On clear, cold nights, his breath created a small fog before the dark wall. But regardless of the circle's appearance, Ko would sit before it and bow with genuine reverence. Each morning, smoke and ash from the fires would blur the previous night's circle beyond recognition. Ko would brush the wall clean and begin his day's work, knowing he would draw again when evening came. A curious neighbor once asked, "Ko, what deity do you pray to each night?" Ko paused from washing his blackened hands and replied simply, "I bow to the moon that appears when all fires go out." The neighbor looked puzzled. "But your wall is completely black, and your moon is drawn with charcoal. How can you see any moon there?" Ko smiled with quiet understanding. Even the darkest wall reflects the light that's already present. One autumn, a traveling potter sought shelter in Ko's humble dwelling. She woke at dawn and observed Ko's morning ritual of drawing a fresh circle with careful attention. "You know," she suggested helpfully, "you could use white chalk instead of charcoal. Then your moon would actually be visible." Ko shook his head gently. "This is the moon that the coals understand. This is the moon that lives in darkness." As winter deepened, fierce storms bent the mountain pines and shook the small hut violently. One particularly wild night, a powerful gust tore the door open and swept ash across the wall, completely erasing Ko's circle before he could bow. He sat before the blank, dark surface, his hands resting quietly on his knees. For the first time in years, Ko did not reach for his charcoal. Instead, he simply sat with the empty wall, allowing the storm to rage around him. In that darkness, he began to see all the circles he had ever drawn. The shaky ones from tired evenings, the perfect ones from centered nights, the interrupted ones from restless times. He felt the presence of his practice in his hands, in his breath, in the quiet attention he had cultivated through countless repetitions. When the wind finally calmed, a single cloud drifted through the open door, creating an even softer darkness against the dark wall. Ko found himself laughing quietly so as not to wake the road. He stepped outside into the clear night and saw the actual moon hanging simply and completely over the black mountain. surrounded by stars that needed no charcoal to shine. Returning to his hut, Ko sat before the unmarked wall and bowed just as deeply as he had to all his drawn circles. The potter opened one sleepy eye and asked, "No moon tonight?" "All moon," Ko replied peacefully. The Buddha taught, "What we think, we become. What we feel, we attract. What we imagine, we create." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth about spiritual practice and the nature of devotion itself. Why do we become so attached to the forms of our practice? Buddhist understanding reveals that our minds naturally create rituals and repetitive actions as anchors for attention and intention. These forms serve a crucial purpose, like Ko's nightly circle drawing. They provide structure for cultivating presence and reverence. However, we often mistake the container for the content, believing that the external action itself produces spiritual benefit. Ko's charcoal circle was never the point. It was simply a vehicle for bringing his complete attention to the present moment. The circle focused his awareness, but the awareness itself was what transformed him. Consider your own spiritual practices. Do you have morning routines, evening prayers, meditation schedules, or other regular observances? Notice how attached you become to performing these correctly or consistently. Watch what happens when circumstances prevent you from completing your usual forms. Do you feel you've missed something essential? Or can you recognize that the quality of attention you bring is more important than the specific actions? The deeper teaching here shows us that authentic practice eventually liberates us from dependence on external forms. Ko's years of drawing circles with devoted attention cultivated a quality of presence that existed independently of the charcoal and wall. When the storm erased his circle, he discovered that his capacity for reverence had become internalized. Zen master Dogen wrote, "Practice and enlightenment are one." This means that the value of spiritual practice lies not in achieving some future state, but in the quality of awareness we bring to each moment of practice itself. Ko's bowing to the charcoal moon was not preparation for eventually seeing a real moon. It was complete spiritual activity in itself. The storm that erased Ko's circle represents the inevitable moments in life when our familiar structures are disrupted. Illness, loss, travel, or major life changes can interrupt our regular practices. These disruptions become opportunities to discover whether we've been practicing with attachment to form or with genuine understanding. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron reminds us, the spiritual journey is not about getting somewhere else, but about being where you are and understanding what that means. Ko's charcoal moon taught him to find the sacred in his actual circumstances, rather than waiting for ideal conditions. The contrast between Ko's charcoal moon and the real moon in the sky points toward a profound principle. We often dismiss our imperfect, humble practices while imagining that authentic spirituality exists somewhere else, in more dramatic or sophisticated forms. But Ko understood that his blackened wall reflected the same light as the sky above. This story also reveals the evolution of practice over time. Beginning practitioners often need clear, concrete forms to anchor their attention. Ko needed to physically draw circles and bow to them, but mature practice becomes more fluid and internal. Eventually, Ko could bow to emptiness itself, recognizing the sacred in the absence of form. The Buddha said, "There are only two mistakes one can make along the road to truth. not going all the way and not starting. Ko's practice shows us both starting and going all the way. He started with simple, humble materials and devoted himself completely to the practice. Eventually, his devotion matured into a freedom that could find the sacred anywhere. Notice how Ko never abandoned his practice or declared it meaningless. When he realized he didn't need the charcoal circle, he simply held it more lightly, drawing sometimes and not drawing other times, responding to each moment freshly rather than following rigid rules. Tonight, as you engage in whatever practices anchor your own spiritual life, remember Ko's charcoal moon. Can you bring the same devoted attention to these activities while holding them lightly? Can you recognize that the sacred you're seeking through practice is already present in the very quality of attention you're bringing right now? As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. When Ko learned to see the moon in charcoal on a black wall, he was training his mind to recognize the light that exists in every circumstance, even the darkest ones. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the nature of true listening. This is the tale of the bell without a clapper. In a fishing village where fog rolled in from the sea each morning, there lived a renowned bell founder named Haku, whose bronze creations could be heard across great distances. For generations, his bells had marked the hours for sailors, called children home for dinner, and announced festivals and ceremonies. The clear, resonant notes of Haku's bells were woven into the very fabric of village life. One spring, after a particularly fierce storm had damaged his workshop and washed his bell molds into the sea, Haku made a surprising announcement. He would forge one final bell, but this bell would have no clapper. The village mayor arrived at Haku's workshop, concerned. "Master Haku, how can a bell serve the village if it cannot ring? What use is a silent bell?" Haku paused from polishing a piece of bronze and tapped gently on his teacup with a wooden spoon. "Listen," he said. "Everything in this world can serve as a striker. Perhaps we have forgotten how to hear." Working only by moonlight when the ocean's rhythm was most apparent, Haku carefully crafted his final bell. Into the bronze, he mixed sand gathered from that liminal space where waves neither advance nor retreat, where the sea pauses in perfect balance. When the bell had cooled, Haku refused the mayor's suggestion to hang it in the traditional tower. Instead, he placed it on a smooth stone at the harbor's edge, at just the right height for people to approach and touch. Word spread quickly through the village. People came to see Haku's strange creation. A fishmonger, tired from the morning market, leaned her hip against the bell while counting her coins. Children pressed their ears to its bronze surface, listening for the sound of distant wails. An old monk placed his palm flat against the metal, then slowly lifted it, feeling how the bronze held his warmth for several heartbeats before releasing it to the cool morning air. Days passed without a single audible note. The mayor grew increasingly frustrated. "Master Haku, a bell that makes no sound is nothing more than an expensive pot with a wide mouth. The people are beginning to talk." Haku gestured toward the rhythmic waves. "Perhaps they should listen with their whole bodies instead of just their ears." That evening, a fog so soft it seemed to have no edges rolled in from the sea. Fishing boats found their way by following the gentle lights of buoys and the lighthouse beacon. One young fisherman, carrying a lantern and walking carefully along the harbour, stopped when he encountered the silent bell. Setting down his lantern, he placed both palms against the bronze surface. The bell hummed, not in his ears, but in the bones of his wrists and forearms. The bronze seemed to breathe with the ocean's pulse, drinking in the night air and returning it as a subtle vibration that resonated through his entire body. He stood there for several minutes, feeling connected to something vast and steady beneath the fog. Word of this discovery spread through the village like ripples on water. The bell rings in the body, people whispered. Couples began meeting there, leaning against the bronze together until their hearts found a common rhythm. Sailors returning from rough voyages would place their foreheads against the bell's surface, allowing the tremor of the waves to ease the tension from their jaws and shoulders. Even the skeptical mayor found himself drawn to the bell one lonely morning. Leaning his back against its curved surface, he felt it respond to his deep sigh with a gentle vibration that seemed to acknowledge and accept his weariness. A traveling merchant, curious about this unusual attraction, asked Haku directly, "Master, why did you remove the clapper from your final bell?" Haku smiled with the wisdom of years spent listening to metal sing. The bell was always ringing. The clapper only argued with its true voice. As the Buddha understood, peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. Here we discover a profound teaching about the difference between noise and true communication, between hearing and genuine listening. Why do we assume that meaningful communication must be loud or obvious? Zen Buddhism reveals that our culture has trained us to recognize only the most dramatic forms of expression, while remaining deaf to subtler languages that speak directly to the body and heart. Our conditioning teaches us that silence equals absence, that if something cannot be heard with the ears, it has no value. But Haku's bell demonstrates that the most profound communications often occur below the threshold of ordinary hearing. The bell was always vibrating with the rhythm of the earth, the pulse of the sea, the breathing of the wind. The clapper only obscured this deeper song with its crude striking. Consider your own patterns of listening. How often do you wait for others to speak loudly or dramatically before paying attention? How much subtle communication do you miss because you're only listening for words? Notice the difference between hearing someone's voice and feeling their presence, between understanding their words and sensing their heart. The villagers who discovered the bell's true voice had to engage with it differently than they had with traditional bells. Instead of waiting passively for sound to reach their ears, they had to approach, touch, and open their whole bodies to receive its message. This represents a fundamental shift from passive consumption to active participation in communication. Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh speaks of deep listening, the practice of receiving others with our entire being rather than just our analytical minds. The bell without a clapper teaches this same skill. When we listen with our bodies, our hearts, our complete attention, we hear communications that remain invisible to our thinking minds. The bell's placement at the harbor's edge, where sea meets land, symbolizes the liminal space where true listening occurs. It's the threshold between our ordinary consciousness and deeper ways of knowing. Standing in this space requires us to slow down, become present, and allow ourselves to be touched by subtler forms of communication. Modern life provides few opportunities for this kind of listening. We're surrounded by devices that communicate through dramatic signals designed to capture our attention immediately. We lose our capacity to perceive gentle communications, the way our bodies speak to us, the way nature offers guidance, the way other people's presence affects us beneath the level of words. The fog that rolled in the evening when the young fisherman first heard the bell represents the conditions that support deep listening. When our usual reference points become obscured, when we can't rely on familiar visual cues or mental maps, we naturally become more receptive to subtle guidance. Zen practice cultivates this receptivity through meditation, where we learn to listen to the silence between thoughts, the space between breaths, the stillness that underlies all movement. This is the same quality of attention that allowed the villagers to hear Haku's bell. The Buddha taught, silence is not empty, it is full of answers. The bell without a clapper embodies this truth perfectly. Its silence contained infinite communication for those who knew how to receive it. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, can you listen to your environment the way the villagers learned to listen to Haku's bell? What subtle communications might your body be offering? What gentle wisdom might be available if you open to receive it with more than just your thinking mind? As the Buddha said, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. In learning to listen with our whole being, we discover that the world is constantly offering guidance, comfort, and connection through languages more intimate than words. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a teaching about how our relationship to outcomes affects our natural capabilities. This is the story of an archer whose skill fluctuated with his desires. In the rolling hills outside a prosperous town, an annual archery competition draws skilled bowmen from across the region. Among them stands a particular archer whose technique has been refined through years of dedicated practice. His form is flawless, his concentration steady, and his accuracy remarkable when he practices alone in the quiet forest. The first contest begins with a modest prize, a simple crate of earthenware pottery. The archer approaches the shooting line with relaxed confidence. The pottery is useful, certainly, but nothing that significantly changes his circumstances. He already owns adequate vessels for his daily needs, and while winning would be pleasant, losing would not disturb his peace. Drawing his bow with fluid grace, he settles into the familiar stance that has become second nature through countless hours of practice. His breathing steadies, his vision narrows to the target, and his release is smooth and natural. Arrow after arrow finds its mark with precision that impresses the gathered spectators. His performance is effortless, almost meditative in its consistency. When the competition organizers announce that the second round will offer a copper ornament of considerable beauty and value, something subtle shifts in the archer's being. This prize represents more than utility. It carries aesthetic worth and social status. Winning would bring not just possession, but recognition of his superior skill. As he draws his bow for the second round, his hands develop a slight tremor that wasn't present before. His breathing becomes slightly forced rather than naturally rhythmic. The target seems somehow different, more important, more demanding of perfect accuracy. While his shooting remains quite good, the effortless precision of the first round has evaporated. Several arrows land wide of their intended mark, though still within the competitive range. When the final round is announced with a prize of pure gold, the archer's transformation becomes complete. The precious metal represents not just wealth, but life-changing opportunity. This prize could alter his family's circumstances, provide security for years to come, and establish his reputation as a master archer. The stakes have become enormous. Standing at the shooting line, the archer finds his vision strangely affected. He squints and blinks, unable to focus clearly on the target. His draw feels awkward, his stance uncertain. The bow that had felt like an extension of his body now seems foreign and uncooperative. Arrow after arrow flies wide of the mark, some missing the target entirely. His legendary skill has abandoned him precisely when he needs it most. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, attachment is the root of suffering. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our grasping at outcomes can sabotage the very abilities we hope will secure those outcomes. Why does increased importance often lead to decreased performance? Buddhist psychology reveals that when we become overly invested in results, our attention splits between the process and the prize. Instead of being present with the immediate requirements of our activity, we project forward into imagined futures of success or failure. The archer's declining performance demonstrates what happens when wanting mind replaces just doing mind. In the first round, his entire being was available for the simple task of accurate shooting. By the final round, much of his mental energy was consumed by calculations about what the gold would mean, fears about missing this opportunity, and pressure to perform at a level that would justify his self-image. This pattern of performance anxiety reveals itself across every area of human endeavor. The job interview we desperately need goes worse than the casual conversation with someone we're not trying to impress. The sport we play beautifully in practice becomes clumsy during important competitions. The speech we deliver flawlessly to friends becomes stumbling when given to influential audiences. Zen teachings point to the paradox that we often get what we want most naturally when we're not desperately grasping for it. This isn't about becoming indifferent to outcomes, but about maintaining what Master Suzuki called don't know mind, complete presence with the process while holding results lightly. The Buddha taught, the whole secret of existence is to have no fear. Never fear what will become of you. Depend on no one. Only the moment you reject all help are you freed. This doesn't encourage recklessness, but points to the liberation that comes from performing wholeheartedly, without attachment to validation through results. Consider your own relationship with different levels of stakes. Perhaps you've noticed that conversations flow easily with strangers, but become stilted around people whose opinions matter to you. Maybe your creative work feels natural when done for personal satisfaction, but becomes forced when aimed at impressing others. The archer's story reveals how pressure creates tunnel vision that actually narrows our capacity rather than sharpening it. When we're relaxed and present, we have access to peripheral awareness, intuitive timing, and unconscious competence. Under pressure, conscious control attempts to manage processes that function better when left to trained instinct. Master Takuan taught samurai about no mind, the state of consciousness that acts without self-consciousness, responds without hesitation, and performs without performance anxiety. The mind must always be in the state of flowing, he wrote. For when it stops anywhere, that means the flow is interrupted, and this interruption is injurious to the well-being of the mind. This doesn't mean we should avoid challenging situations or ambitious goals, but but rather that we should develop the ability to remain present with our activity regardless of external stakes. The gold prize doesn't change the fundamental requirements of accurate archery. It only changes our internal relationship to those requirements. Practical cultivation of this capacity involves deliberately practicing skills in low-stakes environments, then gradually introducing pressure while maintaining the same quality of attention. More importantly, it requires developing what Buddhists call equanimity, the capacity to remain steadily present whether outcomes align with our preferences or not. Tonight, as you reflect on areas where pressure diminishes your natural capabilities, can you explore maintaining the same quality of presence regardless of what hangs in the balance? Perhaps you'll discover that your most skilled and joyful performance emerges when you're completely absorbed in the activity itself, rather than the rewards it might bring. As the Buddha said, "Do not overrate what you have received, nor envy others. He who envies others does not obtain peace of mind." Peace of mind is precisely what allows our natural abilities to express themselves freely, whether shooting for earthenware or gold. As we continue our journey through these Zen teachings, we explore a story about the delicate balance between inner awareness and sensory engagement. This is the ancient tale of chaos and the gift of perception. In the timeless realm where abstract forces take form as characters in wisdom stories, there lived three peculiar beings whose names perfectly describe their nature: chaos, disorder, and despair. Despite what their names might suggest, these three maintained an unusual friendship built on mutual appreciation and complementary energies. Chaos existed as a formless, flowing presence, neither good nor bad, neither helpful nor harmful, simply the pure potential from which all experiences could emerge. Chaos possessed a kind of innocent completeness, lacking nothing and needing nothing, existing in perfect harmony with whatever arose in each moment. Disorder and despair, despite their seemingly negative appellations, lived joyfully within chaos's realm. They found endless entertainment and satisfaction in their relationship with this primal force. Days passed in delightful companionship as they explored the infinite possibilities that chaos's nature made available. One day, as often happens in deep friendships, disorder and despair began reflecting on their relationship with their beloved companion. "You know," disorder mused thoughtfully, "chaos takes such wonderful care of us. We're always comfortable here, always entertained, always provided for. Perhaps we should offer something in return." Despair nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, but what could we possibly give to someone who already has everything? Chaos seems complete and lacking nothing. What gift could improve upon such perfection?" They contemplated this question seriously, scanning chaos's being for any apparent deficiency that they might address. Finally, despair's face lit up with inspiration. "Wait, I noticed something. Chaos has no openings, no holes for seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, or touch. How can chaos experience the world without senses?" "Brilliant observation," disorder exclaimed. "Let's give chaos the gift of sensory perception. We'll create openings that will allow direct contact with all the wonderful phenomena that exist, but currently go unnoticed." With tremendous enthusiasm and affection, they began their project. Day by day, they carefully created openings in chaos's being. They formed eyes for seeing colors and forms. They carved ears for hearing sounds and music. They shaped a nose for detecting fragrances and odors. They formed a mouth for experiencing tastes and flavors. They created skin with sensitivity to texture and temperature. Each new opening seemed to bring chaos greater capacity for interaction with the previously inaccessible world of sensory experience. Disorder and despair worked with love and dedication, convinced they were offering their friend an invaluable enhancement. On the sixth day of their creative endeavor, something unexpected occurred. As they completed the final sensory opening, chaos began to change in ways they hadn't anticipated. The formless, flowing presence that had been so complete and serene started fragmenting into different experiences and responses. Where once there had been undifferentiated awareness, now there were separate channels of perception, each demanding attention and creating preferences. By the seventh day, chaos as they had known him was gone. The unified presence had become a complex being subject to sensory overload, conflicting desires, and the constant chatter of mental activity responding to endless streams of information. What disorder and despair had intended as gifts had become sources of distraction and fragmentation. Their friend had gained the ability to see, hear, taste, smell, and touch, but had lost the profound peace and completeness that had characterized his original nature. The very openings meant to enrich his experience had created the conditions for what humans call suffering, preference and aversion, desire and fear, the constant mental commentary that accompanies sensory engagement. The Buddha taught, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. What emerges from this story is the recognition that consciousness itself remains untouched by experience, while our identification with sensory phenomena creates the very chaos we seek to escape. Why does increased sensory awareness often seem to complicate rather than enrich our experience of life? Buddhist psychology explains that consciousness in its natural state exists as open, undifferentiated awareness, similar to the story's original chaos. When this awareness becomes focused through the holes of sensory perception, it creates the illusion of being a separate self encountering an external world. The tale reveals that sensory perception itself isn't problematic, but our relationship to sensory experience often creates unnecessary complications. When we identify completely with what we see, hear, taste, smell, and touch, we lose contact with the awareness that remains constant beneath all changing phenomena. This ancient wisdom points toward what contemplative traditions call pure consciousness, awareness before it becomes entangled with the objects of its attention. This isn't unconsciousness, but rather consciousness that knows itself as the space within which all experience appears and disappears. The story's tragic irony lies in how gifts intended to enhance experience actually created limitations. Similarly, our sophisticated sensory engagement with modern life, constant visual stimulation, endless audio input, complex flavors and fragrances, intricate textures and temperatures, can overwhelm our capacity for simple presence. Buddhist meditation practices often involve temporarily reducing sensory input in order to rediscover the stillness that exists beneath sensory activity. This isn't about rejecting the world of the senses, but about developing the capacity to engage them without losing contact with our essential nature. The Buddha said, "The wise find pleasure in the truth." The deepest truth this story reveals is that what we seek through sensory experience, peace, fulfillment, connection, already exists in the awareness that perceives all sensations. We don't need to acquire these qualities through external means. We need to recognize them as our fundamental nature. Consider how your own relationship to sensory experience might sometimes create the very restlessness it promises to resolve. Perhaps constant visual entertainment prevents the recognition of natural contentment. Maybe continuous audio input covers the profound silence from which all sounds emerge. Possibly complex flavors distract from the simple satisfaction of nourishment itself. Zen practice cultivates what might be called sensory mindfulness, full engagement with seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and touching, while maintaining awareness of the consciousness that makes all perception possible. This allows us to enjoy the gifts of embodied existence without being enslaved by sensory desires. The story suggests that chaos, in its original sense, isn't confusion or dysfunction, but the fertile emptiness from which all possibilities emerge. This connects to the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, action that arises naturally from stillness rather than forced effort driven by sensory preferences. Advanced practitioners speak of returning to original mind, not by rejecting sensory experience, but by recognizing the awareness that remains unchanged whether senses are engaged or quiet. This awareness is like space itself, which contains all phenomena without being altered by anything that appears within it. The holes created by disorder and despair represent how attention becomes focused and therefore limited. While focus enables detailed perception, it also creates the possibility of tunnel vision, selective awareness, and the miss of the bigger picture that unfocused consciousness naturally perceives. This teaching doesn't advocate sensory deprivation, but points toward conscious engagement with the sensory world. When we use our capacity for seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and touching as doors back to presence, rather than as escapes from presence, they become allies in awakening rather than obstacles. Tonight, as you engage your senses with the world around you, perhaps noticing colors and forms, sounds and silences, tastes and textures, can you also notice the still awareness within which all these perceptions appear? Perhaps you'll discover that the peace you seek through managing sensory experience already exists as the very consciousness that experiences everything. As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 meaningless words is one meaningful word that brings peace. Sometimes that word is simply the recognition of who is aware of all words, all sensations, all experiences, the changeless awareness that you have always been. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of contentment. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hillsides, a weary traveler encountered a shepherd tending his flock. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, and clouds gathered on the horizon, creating an uncertain sky that could promise either gentle rain or scorching heat. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth boulder, watching his sheep graze contentedly among wild grasses. His face bore the calm expression of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his demeanor, a quality of unshakable serenity that drew the traveler's attention. "Good morning, friend," the traveler called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?" The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clarity and smiled with genuine warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he replied simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveler paused, confused. He had expected a practical forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like circular logic, offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler pressed, his voice carrying frustration mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile deepened, and he gestured toward the vast sky above them, where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said, with the patience of one who had learned life's most essential lesson. "I have learned to always like what I get, so I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveler stood in silence, the profound simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding, like seeds finding fertile ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather predictions in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the anxiety of uncertainty. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true contentment comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from transforming our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Why do we exhaust ourselves trying to arrange life according to our preferences, rather than learning to find peace within whatever life presents? The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance, not passive resignation, but the profound wisdom that recognizes resistance to reality as the primary source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an internal war that drains our energy and blocks our capacity for contentment. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it unfolds, we discover the tremendous peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Consider how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day resisting circumstances beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't behave as we think they should. Each resistance creates a small contraction in our awareness, a tiny rebellion against reality that accumulates into chronic dissatisfaction. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to have preferences. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when outcomes differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our preferences lightly rather than allowing them to determine our contentment. Zen Master Seng Tsan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest eliminating all desires, but rather not allowing those desires to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of resistance. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing circumstances were different, or believing you'll be content when things change? This tension is optional, not because you should suppress your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that attachment doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on external circumstances, arranging themselves according to our specifications. The shepherd cares about his flock and appreciates comfort, but his fundamental contentment doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, both pleasant and challenging, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own awareness? What if contentment isn't waiting for better circumstances, but is available right now through a shift in perspective? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. the shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. Now, let us explore a story about the nature of genuine assistance and the goal of true teaching. This is the encounter between the psychiatrist and the Zen master. At a gathering of professionals and spiritual teachers, a psychiatrist found himself in conversation with a renowned Zen master. The psychiatrist had built his career on helping people work through their psychological difficulties, analyzing their problems, and providing therapeutic interventions designed to improve their mental health and emotional well-being. Curious about how different approaches to helping might compare, the psychiatrist decided to ask the master a direct question that had been on his mind throughout their conversation. "I've spent years learning various techniques for helping people with their emotional and psychological struggles," the psychiatrist said. "I'm curious about your approach. Exactly how do you help people?" The master listened to the question with the same calm attention he brought to everything, considering not just the words but the assumptions underlying them. After a moment of thoughtful silence, he offered a response that was both simple and profound. "I get them to a place where they can't ask any more questions," the master replied. The psychiatrist paused, uncertain whether this was meant as a serious answer or perhaps some kind of Zen riddle. "I'm not sure I understand," he said. "Surely questioning is important in any process of growth and understanding." The master smiled gently. Questions arise from the mind that believes it lacks something. When someone reaches the place where questions naturally cease, they have found what they were truly seeking all along. Buddha's wisdom tells us, doubt everything, find your own light. Yet this ancient teaching reveals a paradox. True finding comes not through endless questioning, but through arriving at a completeness where questions become unnecessary. Why do we assume that helping people means providing answers to their questions, when the deepest healing might involve dissolving the questioner itself? Zen Buddhism points to the possibility that many of our problems exist only because we continue to ask the questions that create and maintain them. The psychiatrist's approach, like that of most helping professions, focuses on analyzing problems, understanding their origins, and developing strategies for managing or resolving them. This method has value and can provide genuine relief for many forms of suffering. But the master's approach suggests something more radical. Helping people transcend the very framework that generates their problems. Consider the endless questions that occupy your own mind. How can I be happier? Why do I keep making the same mistakes? What should I do with my life? How can I find meaning? Each question implies a questioner who lacks something, who needs something, who must figure something out. But what if the questioner itself is the source of the seeking? In Zen practice, we discover that many of our problems are maintained by the very effort to solve them. The mind that constantly asks, "How can I find peace?" is the same mind that disturbs the peace that is naturally present. The person who desperately seeks enlightenment may be reinforcing the very sense of separation that creates the feeling of being unenlightened. The master's method of getting people where they can't ask any more questions isn't about suppressing inquiry or promoting ignorance. Rather, it's about guiding people to a direct experience of completeness where questions naturally dissolve because there's nothing more to seek. Zen Master Bankai taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle anything that comes up." When someone truly realizes their fundamental completeness, questions about how to be complete simply cease to arise. Problems don't need to be solved, They're recognized as temporary appearances in the vast space of awareness. This doesn't mean practical questions disappear entirely. What should I have for lunch? Or which route should I take to work? Are functional questions that serve practical purposes. The questions that cease are the existential ones that arise from a fundamental sense of lack or incompleteness. The Buddha said, "There is nothing to do, nothing to gain, nothing to lose." This teaching points to the same understanding the Master was indicating. True help comes not from giving people more to do or figure out, but from helping them realize they are already what they seek. Look deeply at your own relationship with questions and seeking. How much of your mental energy goes toward trying to solve the problem of your life rather than living it? What would remain if you stopped asking the questions that assume something is fundamentally wrong or missing? The psychiatrist helps by analyzing and providing tools. The Master helps by pointing to what needs no analysis or improvement. Both approaches can serve, but the Master's method aims for the root rather than the branches, dissolving the seeker rather than satisfying the seeking. Tonight, as you notice the questions that typically occupy your mind, can you sense what lies beneath them? Can you find the space of awareness that exists prior to all questions, the completeness that needs no answers because it lacks nothing? As the Buddha observed, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The deepest help we can receive or offer others is the recognition that what we seek has never been absent. Questions cease, not because they've been answered, but because the one who was asking them discovers there was never actually anything to ask about. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the way of true victory through the wisdom of avoiding conflict altogether. This is winning without trying. A legendary warrior named Tsukahara Bokuden had founded an unusual school of martial arts with a paradoxical name, the way of winning without trying, also known as the way of not losing. His reputation for both martial skill and spiritual wisdom had spread throughout Japan, though few understood the deeper principles behind his unconventional approach. During a journey to eastern Japan, Bokuden found himself aboard a small ferry crossing a wide bay. The boat carried 5 other passengers, and the crossing began peacefully, with everyone sitting quietly, enjoying the gentle motion of the vessel and the beauty of the water. However, one passenger, a large and muscular man, soon began disturbing the tranquil atmosphere. Speaking in an increasingly loud voice, he bragged endlessly about his supposed martial prowess, boasting of opponents he had defeated and techniques he had mastered. His voice grew louder with each story, and his gestures became more animated as he described his various victories. At first, Bokuden simply closed his eyes and tried to rest, paying no attention to the man's boastful display. But as the bragging continued and grew more obnoxious, other passengers began shifting uncomfortably, and the peaceful mood of the journey was completely destroyed. Finally, Bokuden opened his eyes and turned toward the loud man. "Well," he said with gentle curiosity, "we've certainly heard many impressive stories from you. What puzzles me, though, are these elaborate tales about martial arts mastery. I myself have practiced martial arts since childhood, training according to all the traditional forms, but I have never focused on trying to beat anyone. All I have ever worked on is how to avoid losing to anyone." The brash man's eyes lit up with interest. "What school of martial arts do you follow?" he demanded. "The way of winning without trying," Bokuden replied calmly. "Or you might call it the way of not losing." This answer seemed to irritate the braggart. If you claim to win without trying, then why are you carrying swords? He challenged, pointing to the weapons at Bokuden's side. Bokuden smiled. These two swords represent mind communicating with mind. They serve to break the point of conceit and cut off the sprouts of wrong thinking. Hearing this philosophical response, the ruffian's anger flared. Enough riddles, he shouted. If you truly follow this way of winning without trying, then prove it. Let's have a duel right now, and we'll see whether you can win without trying. Bokuden remained perfectly calm. In this case, he said thoughtfully, while the sword of my heart is ordinarily a life-giving sword, when facing someone with harmful intentions, it naturally becomes a death-dealing sword. This cryptic response only inflamed the man's rage further. Unable to contain his mounting fury, he demanded that the boatmen immediately head for shore so they could settle the matter with a proper duel. Bokuden caught the boatman's eye and gave him an almost imperceptible signal. Then he addressed the angry challenger. The shoreline ahead is too crowded with people for a proper duel. I'll demonstrate the way of winning without trying over there, on that small island just off the promontory. Although I'm sure the other passengers are anxious to continue their journey, if you insist so strongly on this contest, we might as well settle it. The boatman steered toward the tiny islet, and the moment they approached, the ruffian leapt eagerly onto the rocky shore, immediately drawing his sword. Come on, he shouted, waving his weapon menacingly. Get up here so I can split your head in two. Still seated calmly in the boat, Bokuden replied, Wait just a moment. The way of winning without trying requires one to first calm the mind. With deliberate slowness, he removed his swords from his belt and handed them to the boatman, taking the man's long pole in exchange. For a moment, it appeared that Bokuden was preparing to beach the boat and step onto the island, but suddenly he thrust the pole in the opposite direction and pushed the boat rapidly away from shore, leaving the bewildered challenger stranded on the tiny island. As the distance between boat and shore increased, the ruffian began shouting frantically, Why don't you come back here and fight like a man? Bokuden laughed heartily. Why should I? If you have a complaint, then swim out here and I'll give you all the instruction you can handle. This is the true way of winning without trying. Buddha spoke of this when he said, Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law, eternal. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that the greatest victories often come from refusing to engage in conflicts that serve no constructive purpose. Why do we so often feel compelled to prove ourselves through confrontation? Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that draw us into unnecessary battles. Our ego constantly seeks validation through overcoming opposition, mistaking dominance for strength and conflict for courage. Like the boastful passenger, we often confuse volume with authority and aggression with competence. We also fall into the trap of taking personal offense at others' provocations, allowing their emotions to dictate our responses. When someone challenges our abilities or questions our worth, we feel obligated to defend ourselves through demonstration, rather than simply remaining secure in our actual capabilities. Additionally, we frequently mistake avoidance for cowardice when, in many situations, withdrawal represents the highest form of wisdom. True strength lies not in our ability to defeat opponents, but in our capacity to remain centered regardless of external pressures to prove ourselves. Consider how this wisdom applies to modern life. How often do we engage in arguments on social media that serve no purpose except feeding our ego's need to be right? How frequently do we accept challenges from colleagues or family members that only create more conflict without resolving underlying issues? The Zen teacher Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." Bokuden's apparent retreat was actually the most skillful action possible. He avoided unnecessary violence while teaching both his challenger and the other passengers a profound lesson about the nature of true strength. Notice the layers of wisdom in Bokuden's response. He first attempted to defuse the situation through calm reasoning. When that failed, he redirected the conflict to an isolated location to protect innocent bystanders. Finally, he demonstrated that the highest martial arts is knowing when not to fight at all. This doesn't mean avoiding all challenges or conflicts, but rather discerning which battles serve a constructive purpose and which merely feed our ego's appetite for drama. Some conflicts help us grow, protect others, or serve justice. Others, like the ferry passenger's challenge, exist only to satisfy someone's need for dominance. The Buddha said, "In the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go." Bokuden's victory required letting go of the need to prove his martial abilities in order to demonstrate something far more valuable: the wisdom of winning without fighting. The challenger was left with more than wounded pride on that tiny island. He received a teaching about the difference between true strength and mere aggression, though whether he understood the lesson remained his choice. Tonight, as you reflect on conflicts in your own life, can you distinguish between battles worth fighting and challenges that serve only ego? Where might you apply Bokuden's wisdom by winning through not engaging? What would it mean to push the boat away from your own unnecessary islands of conflict? As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes that one word is silence, and the greatest victory is the fight we choose not to have. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the fierce wisdom that sometimes wears the disguise of ordinary appearance and the power of immediate, direct testing of spiritual understanding. This is the old woman with the fire tongs. At the Harapo station, where travelers pause to rest and refresh themselves during long journeys through the mountain passes, stood a modest tea stall run by an elderly woman whose appearance suggested nothing more remarkable than the practical wisdom that comes from years of serving weary visitors. Her weathered hands moved efficiently as she prepared tea and simple meals, and her manner was direct and unassuming, offering no hint of the extraordinary spiritual power that lay beneath her humble exterior. This unassuming tea stall keeper had studied Zen intensively under the great master Hakuin, one of the most demanding and accomplished teachers of his era. Through years of rigorous practice and direct transmission, she had developed what those who knew her well recognized as remarkable spiritual attainment. Her realization was not theoretical or partial, but complete and immediately available for practical application. Master Hakuin himself, despite his reputation for uncompromising standards and fierce teaching methods, held this old woman in the highest regard. Whenever he encountered monks whose practice had become stagnant or who seemed lost in intellectual speculation rather than direct experience, he would express his frustration with a characteristic sigh. "Like this, when are you ever going to realize enlightenment?" he would exclaim to these wavering students. "Go study with the old tea stall lady. She'll show you what real understanding looks like." It became known throughout the region that this recommendation from Master Hakuin was both an honor and a formidable challenge. The old woman's reputation for spiritual power was matched by her reputation for complete intolerance of superficial understanding or pretense. She had no patience for students who thought they could impress her with elaborate philosophical discussions or impressive credentials. When monks would arrive at her tea stall, word of their spiritual seeking often preceded them. The moment such a visitor appeared, the old lady would immediately cut through any preliminary conversation with a direct challenge. "Studying Zen?" she would demand, her voice carrying an authority that seemed inconsistent with her humble appearance. "Yes," the monk would typically reply, perhaps expecting to engage in the kind of respectful dialogue that usually characterized encounters between spiritual practitioners. When the unsuspecting monk followed her behind the screen, expecting perhaps to engage in formal Dharma discussion or to receive traditional spiritual instruction, he would instead find himself immediately confronted with a penetrating Zen question designed to reveal the actual depth of his understanding rather than his ability to discuss spiritual topics intellectually. The moment the monk showed any sign of hesitation, any indication that he was thinking about his response rather than responding from direct realization, the old lady would drive him out with a pair of iron fire tongs, wielding them with the fierce authority of someone who had no interest in wasting time on partial understanding or spiritual pretense. Her method was instantaneous and uncompromising. She could distinguish immediately between authentic realization and intellectual knowledge, between direct understanding and spiritual performance. Those who tried to impress her with learned responses or philosophical sophistication found themselves chased away by her fire tongs, while those who responded from genuine understanding received her recognition and further guidance. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, by three methods we may learn wisdom. First, by reflection, which is noblest. Second, by imitation, which is easiest. And third, by experience, which is the bitterest. The deeper teaching here shows us how authentic spiritual understanding reveals itself through immediate, direct response rather than through elaborate intellectual demonstration. This story unveils something profound about the nature of real spiritual authority and the difference between genuine realization and scholarly knowledge about spiritual topics. The old tea stall woman embodied a form of teaching that prioritized direct transmission over comfortable dialogue, immediate testing over gradual instruction. Her humble appearance and ordinary occupation disguised extraordinary spiritual attainment, pointing toward a crucial teaching about where authentic wisdom can be found. We often expect profound understanding to come from obviously impressive sources, famous teachers, elaborate institutions, or people who look the part of spiritual authority. But genuine realization can emerge anywhere, and often chooses humble forms precisely because they're less likely to attract ego-driven seekers. Why did Master Hakuin, himself a formidable teacher, defer to this old woman's superior ability to test students' understanding? Her method revealed something that formal temple instruction sometimes missed: the ability to distinguish instantly between conceptual knowledge and direct realization. In the artificial environment of formal spiritual settings, students can learn to perform understanding convincingly, but her tea stall provided a context where only authentic realization could survive her fierce testing. The fire tongs represent something important about effective spiritual teaching. Sometimes genuine compassion requires driving away students who aren't ready for real teaching, who are still operating from intellectual understanding rather than direct experience. Her seeming harshness was actually profound kindness. She refused to allow students to remain satisfied with partial understanding, that would ultimately limit their spiritual development. This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to confuse spiritual sophistication with spiritual realization. In our current spiritual culture, we often value teachers who can speak eloquently about consciousness, who can reference multiple traditions knowledgeably, or who can provide complex explanations for spiritual phenomena. But the old woman's testing revealed whether students could respond from immediate understanding rather than memorized concepts. Her demand, studying Zen, followed immediately by practical testing, demonstrates the difference between studying about spirituality and actualizing spiritual understanding in moment-to-moment awareness. Many people can discuss Zen principles intelligently, but fewer can demonstrate the immediate clarity and presence that authentic practice develops. The story reveals the importance of what Zen calls Dharma combat, the practice of testing understanding through direct, immediate exchange rather than gentle, supportive dialogue. This isn't cruelty, but precision. The recognition that genuine spiritual development requires the ability to respond from truth rather than from learned responses or comfortable formulas. We can observe similar dynamics in many areas where authentic mastery is distinguished from theoretical knowledge. The medical emergency that reveals which doctors can think clearly under pressure versus those who function well only in controlled academic settings. The crisis that shows which leaders can respond wisely to unexpected challenges rather than just managing predictable situations. This teaching also points us toward understanding the role of immediate testing in spiritual development. The old woman's fire tongs created a situation where students couldn't rely on familiar intellectual responses, but had to access whatever direct understanding they actually possessed. This kind of pressure can reveal both the strength and limitations of our realization. Zen practice cultivates what might be called immediate availability, the capacity to respond from authentic understanding without the delay of mental processing or reference to learned formulas. When we truly understand something spiritually, our response emerges naturally and immediately, like water flowing downhill. Additionally, our minds tend to prefer gentle, supportive spiritual environments that don't challenge our comfortable level of understanding. The old woman's fierce approach represents the kind of intensive testing that can catalyze genuine breakthrough by refusing to allow students to remain in partial realization. The story also reveals how authentic spiritual authority often operates outside conventional institutional structures. While Master Hakuin held formal religious position and taught in an established temple, he recognized that this humble tea stall keeper possessed something even more valuable: the ability to distinguish and develop genuine understanding with uncompromising precision. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual understanding, can you identify areas where you might be relying on intellectual knowledge rather than direct realization? If you were confronted by the old woman's fire tongs, could you respond from authentic understanding, or would you find yourself grasping for learned concepts and familiar spiritual language? As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The old woman's fierce testing ensured that students developed the kind of understanding that brings genuine peace rather than intellectual satisfaction. Wisdom that can respond immediately and authentically to whatever life presents, without the need for reflection, preparation, or reference to external authorities. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and lived experience. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen communities. Before a wandering monk could receive lodging for the night, he had to engage in what was called Dharma combat, with either the abbot or a designated representative. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual wit and understanding, where profound questions and paradoxical answers revealed the depth of each participant's realization. At one renowned monastery nestled in bamboo forests, a travel-worn monk arrived as evening shadows began to lengthen across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The abbot, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal attendant to conduct the traditional Dharma encounter. This attendant had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he possessed what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limitation, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed profound insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal reception hall, the traveling monk proposed something unusual. "Let us engage in silent debate," he suggested, gesturing with his hands to indicate they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths transcend language altogether. The attendant nodded agreement, and they began their wordless exchange. The wayfarer raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with an expression of calm confidence. Without hesitation, the attendant responded by raising two fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the attendant surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident expression faltered. For a moment, he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something approaching alarm. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the abbot and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Venerable Sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The abbot raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please, tell me what transpired in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to symbolize the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers, indicating the Buddha and the Dharma, both the teacher and the teachings he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete triple gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners. But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all 3 are actually one unified reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek instruction elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here." The abbot listened to this interpretation with growing surprise, for he knew his attendant's character well. As the traveling monk departed into the gathering dusk, the attendant himself appeared, visibly agitated and breathing hard from running. "Where is that insolent rascal?" he demanded, his single eye blazing with indignation. "I've been looking everywhere for him. The nerve of that man. I've never encountered such rudeness disguised as spiritual inquiry." "What exactly happened?" the abbot asked, genuinely curious now about what had transpired between these 2 very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the attendant explained, his voice rising with remembered offense, He insulted me by holding up one finger to indicate that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? Here I thought we were engaging in spiritual discourse, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limitation. Determined to remain polite despite such crudeness, I held up two fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with two eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no ill will for his thoughtless comment. The attendant paused to catch his breath, his agitation increasing as he continued. But the scoundrel wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up three fingers to rub it in further, indicating that between the two of us, there were only 3 eyes total. He was deliberately emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That's when I'd had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his persistent rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners. The abbot stood in stunned silence, contemplating this remarkable demonstration of how two people could participate in identical events while inhabiting completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This profound truth reveals itself in the complete misunderstanding between our two monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These psychological forces create internal weather systems that color our perception of everything around us. The attendant's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong interpretive framework that he couldn't perceive any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual preoccupations caused him to see profound Dharma teachings in what were actually expressions of wounded feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened instruction made him interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as increasingly sophisticated wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or persistent hopes cause you to misread situations completely? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes evidence they don't like you when they're actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you're insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our internal state creates our external experience. Both monks were sincere in their perceptions, yet both were fundamentally mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying or deliberately misinterpreting. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own psychological conditioning. The story points us toward a crucial question. How can we develop the capacity to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what's called don't know mind. Maintaining openness to multiple interpretations, rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The attendant might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his perception. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine the very mind that creates these interpretations, rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." If the attendant had met the traveler's perceived insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, if the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their encounter might have become a genuine teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our internal weather creates our external storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and compassion. Let us now turn to a story about the relationship between outer circumstances and inner cultivation. This is the tale of the horse and the mind. In a remote mountain region where execution grounds served as sobering reminders of mortality, Zen Master Bankei sought to test the depth of his spiritual realization. For several nights, he sat in meditation beneath a wooden crucifix, using the proximity of death to penetrate more deeply into the nature of existence. After completing this intense retreat, Bankei made his way to a nearby area where he could rest. He found a peaceful spot on an embankment surrounding a horse corral where he lay down to continue his contemplation under the open sky. As he rested there, absorbed in profound silence, a harsh sound shattered his peace. From within the corral came the violent sounds of a warrior brutally beating his horse. The animal's cries mixed with the sharp crack of a whip and angry shouts of a man losing control. Master Bankei observed this scene with growing concern. The warrior was clearly frustrated, taking out his inner turmoil on the innocent animal. Each blow seemed to make the horse more agitated, rather than more compliant, creating a vicious cycle of violence and resistance. Unable to remain silent, Bankei called out from his position, "Hey, what do you think you are doing?" The warrior, absorbed in rage, ignored the interruption and continued his harsh treatment. The beating intensified, and so did Bankai's concern for both the animal and the man degrading himself through such cruelty. "Hey!" Bankei called out again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years cultivating inner peace. "What do you think you are doing?" Still, the warrior continued, lost in frustration and anger. The horse became increasingly panicked, which only seemed to fuel the man's determination to force compliance through violence. A third time, Bankai's voice rang out, "Hey! What do you think you are doing?" This time, something in the master's tone penetrated the warrior's rage. The man stopped his beating, climbed down from his horse, and approached the embankment. As he drew closer, his expression changed. There was something about this stranger that commanded respect, a quality of presence that spoke of deep, inner development. "You were yelling at me," the warrior said, his voice still carrying traces of anger, but now mixed with curiosity. "Do you have something to tell me?" Bankei looked at the man with compassion, seeing not an enemy, but someone caught in the same cycles of frustration that trap us all. His response was simple yet profound. Rather than beat your horse for being unruly, why not chastise yourself and train your own mind right? The words hung in the air between them, like a bridge connecting two very different approaches to dealing with difficulty. The warrior had been trying to solve his problem through external force and control. Bankai was pointing to an entirely different possibility. As the Buddha observed, conquer anger with non-anger, conquer badness with goodness, conquer meanness with generosity, conquer dishonesty with truth. This teaching captures the essence of what Bankai offered the frustrated warrior. The recognition that our external struggles mirror our internal state. What emerges from this story is the profound insight that we cannot successfully force the world to conform to our expectations through aggression or control. The warrior's approach, beating the horse into submission, represents how we often try to manage difficult circumstances in our own lives. We become frustrated with external conditions and respond with force, criticism, or manipulation, never recognizing that the real work lies within. Why do we instinctively blame external circumstances for our frustration? Buddhist psychology explains that the untrained mind seeks to maintain its comfort by controlling its environment, rather than developing the flexibility to respond skillfully to whatever arises. This creates what Zen calls pushing the river, exhausting ourselves, trying to force reality to match our preferences. Consider how this pattern manifests in daily life. The computer that crashes during an important project becomes the target of our anger, when the real issue is our attachment to having technology work perfectly. The traffic jam that makes us late triggers road rage, when the actual problem is our expectation that travel should always be smooth. The family member who doesn't respond to our advice becomes the focus of our frustration, when the deeper issue is our need to control others' choices. In each case, we're like the warrior beating the horse, applying force to external circumstances while ignoring the internal conditions that create our suffering. The horse represents the uncontrollable aspects of life: other people's behavior, natural events, technological failures, and the inherent unpredictability of existence. Zen teacher Pema Chodron writes, "You are the sky, everything else is just the weather." This points to the same truth Bankai offered the warrior. Instead of trying to control the weather of external circumstances, we can develop the spacious awareness that remains calm regardless of conditions. The real training involves learning to work with our own minds, rather than trying to force compliance from the world around us. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting harmful situations, but rather approaching challenges from a place of inner stability rather than reactive frustration. Buddhist practice offers specific techniques for this internal training. Mindfulness meditation teaches us to observe our reactive patterns without being swept away by them. Loving kindness practice develops compassion for ourselves and others when things don't go as planned. Contemplation of impermanence helps us accept the changeable nature of all conditions. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable frustrations of daily life, can you remember Bankai's teaching? When you find yourself wanting to beat the horse of difficult circumstances, can you pause and ask, what would it mean to train my own mind instead? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. The path to peace lies not in conquering external conditions, but in cultivating the inner qualities that remain stable regardless of what the world presents. Our next story reveals a profound truth about authentic presence and false barriers. This is the teaching of the screen that separated truth from pretense. Zen master Setan had been invited to deliver a lecture on one of the classical Zen texts at a prestigious monastery. Word of his visit had spread throughout the region, drawing not only monks and serious students, but also curiosity seekers and social climbers who attended such events more for the prestige than the teaching. Among these latter was the provincial baron, a man of considerable wealth and political influence who was known to enjoy being associated with spiritual affairs while maintaining his sense of social superiority. The lecture hall filled to capacity as the appointed hour approached. Monks in their robes sat alongside lay people, all apparently united in their desire to receive Setan's wisdom. The atmosphere was respectful and expectant, with the quiet murmur of anticipation that precedes any significant teaching. But when Master Setan entered the hall and approached the lecture platform, he immediately noticed something that stopped him cold. Behind the main seating area, partially concealing one section of the audience, stood an ornate screen. Its rich silk panels and gold mounting proclaimed the presence of someone who considered themselves too elevated to sit openly with the common audience. Setan paused at the edge of the platform, his eyes fixed on this barrier. Rather than ascending to begin his talk, he called out in a voice that carried clearly to every corner of the hall. "Who is this impudent person hiding behind a screen? My lectures contain no chaff, so there is no need for a winnowing sieve. Remove that screen immediately, or there will be no teaching today." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the hall understood instantly what was happening. The screen, intended to maintain the baron's dignity and social position, had been publicly identified as an obstacle to authentic spiritual communication. The very barrier meant to preserve propriety had been revealed as its opposite, a fundamental violation of the principles that make genuine teaching possible. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to look at the screen, at the master, or at each other. The tension was palpable as everyone waited to see how this confrontation between spiritual authority and worldly power would resolve. Behind the screen, the baron's face burned with humiliation and shock. Never before had anyone dared to challenge his social prerogatives so directly and publicly. Yet something in Setan's unwavering presence and absolute certainty penetrated even the baron's offended pride. Despite his embarrassment and anger, he recognized that he was face to face with an authenticity that made his own pretensions seem suddenly hollow and ridiculous. The screen that had seemed so necessary moments before now felt like a prison of his own making. With as much grace as he could muster, the baron ordered his servants to remove the screen. He then took a place among the other listeners, sitting openly in the same hall with merchants, farmers and monks, people he would normally consider beneath his notice. As the ornate barrier was carried away, something else seemed to be removed as well: the invisible walls that separate human beings when they gather around truth. Only then did Master Setan ascend the platform and begin his lecture. He spoke with the clarity and directness that had made him famous, addressing his words equally to every person present, from the humbled baron to the youngest novice monk. The teaching that followed was said to be one of the most profound of his career, perhaps because it arose from a completely authentic encounter between teacher and audience. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. This ancient teaching points us toward the recognition that authentic spiritual communication requires the complete abandonment of all barriers that separate us from direct, honest encounter with reality. Why do we construct screens between ourselves and genuine spiritual teaching? Zen Buddhism reveals that these barriers arise from our deep fear of being seen as we actually are, rather than as we wish to appear. We create elaborate strategies to maintain our preferred self-image, not realizing that these very strategies prevent us from receiving what we most need. The screen in our story represents every subtle way we protect ourselves from the vulnerability that real spiritual growth requires. Sometimes these screens are literal: the special seating, the exclusive access, the markers of status that keep us separate from others. More often they are psychological: the intellectual sophistication that keeps us from simple truth, the spiritual credentials that make us feel superior to ordinary seekers, the cynicism that protects us from the risk of genuine faith. This story illuminates how social hierarchy and authentic spirituality cannot coexist. The Baron's screen wasn't just protecting his dignity, it was preventing him from participating in the very experience he had come to receive. By maintaining his separation from others, he was also separating himself from the transmission of wisdom that only occurs through direct, unmediated presence. Setan's refusal to teach while the screen remained demonstrates something profound about how truth actually communicates itself. Authentic spiritual teaching cannot occur across artificial barriers, because its essence lies in the recognition of our fundamental equality and interconnection. The moment we position ourselves as inherently different from or superior to others, we close ourselves off from the very insights that could transform us. Consider the screens in your own life, the subtle ways you might maintain barriers between yourself and others during conversations, learning experiences, or spiritual practices. Do you sometimes listen to teachings while filtering them through internal commentaries about your own superiority or inferiority? Do you participate in spiritual communities while maintaining invisible hierarchies based on experience, knowledge, or social position? The Baron's eventual willingness to remove the screen and sit openly with others represents the humility that authentic spiritual growth requires. This wasn't humiliation, but a return to his essential nature as a human being among human beings, all equally in need of wisdom and grace. His embarrassment was temporary. His liberation from the prison of false dignity was profound. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The screen represented the Baron's thoughts about who he was and how he should be treated. When he finally saw clearly, he recognized these thoughts as obstacles to direct experience. Additional wisdom appears in how Setan handled this confrontation. He didn't shame the Baron personally, but identified the screen itself as the problem. His metaphor of chaff and winnowing basket was brilliantly precise. Chaff is the useless covering that must be separated from grain, and a winnowing sieve makes that separation possible. But since his teaching contained no useless elements, no tool for separating good from bad was necessary. We can also observe how this teaching applies to our contemporary spiritual landscape, where social media, celebrity teachers, and expensive retreats can create their own forms of screening. How often do we approach spiritual teachings from behind the screens of our consumer preferences, our tribal identities, or our need to appear sophisticated rather than simply hungry for truth. Tonight, as you settle into reflection, can you sense where screens might exist between you and authentic encounters with this moment? Can you feel the relief that comes from setting aside the barriers that maintain your preferred image and simply being present as you actually are? As the Buddha taught, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. In removing our screens, we discover that what we thought we needed to protect was actually preventing us from receiving what we most deeply sought. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of presence and the boundaries we create between availability and solitude. This is Out Today. Master Sengai had developed an unusual habit that both puzzled and amused his community. On certain days, without any apparent pattern or warning, he would close the wooden gate to his temple quarters and paste upon it a simple handwritten sign that read, "Out Today." Yet anyone passing by could clearly see him through the spaces in the fence, walking peacefully back and forth in his front garden, tending to his plants, sitting in meditation, or simply enjoying the afternoon sunshine. The master made no effort to hide his presence. He moved about his daily activities with complete naturalness, watering flowers, sweeping leaves, or reading beneath his favorite tree. To any observer, he was obviously at home and available, making the sign's message seem like either a joke or a contradiction. One afternoon, a samurai official who had long been acquainted with the master happened to pass by the temple. Noticing Sengai clearly visible in his garden, the official approached the gate with a friendly smile and called out, "Your Reverence, I haven't seen you in some time. How have you been? I was hoping we might have a conversation." Master Sengai looked up from the chrysanthemums he was arranging and simply pointed to the sign posted prominently on his gate. "Please read what it says," he replied matter-of-factly. The samurai, increasingly confused, gestured toward the master with obvious bewilderment. "But Your Reverence, you're clearly here, aren't you? I can see you right there in front of me. You must just be kidding around." Sengai dismissed him with a gentle wave of his hand, his expression remaining perfectly serious. "That sign says I'm out. It's as true as anything can be." And with that declaration, he turned his attention back to his flowers, refusing any further conversation. The samurai stood at the gate for several more minutes, watching the master continue his gardening, trying to comprehend this strange interaction. Finally, shaking his head in confusion, he departed, leaving Master Sengai to his peculiar form of absence. As the Buddha understood, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. This teaching relates profoundly to our modern struggle with the boundaries between availability and inner sanctuary, between social obligation and spiritual necessity. Why do we find it so difficult to establish clear boundaries around our inner availability, even when we are physically present? This story unveils our complex relationship with accessibility and the guilt we often feel about not being constantly available to others' needs and expectations. In our hyper-connected world, the pressure to be perpetually accessible has become overwhelming. Our phones buzz with constant demands for attention. Our email inboxes fill with urgent requests. Social media creates an expectation of immediate response and continuous engagement. We have lost the ancient wisdom of knowing when to be present and when to be out, regardless of our physical location. Master Sengai understood something profound about the nature of true availability. Being physically present doesn't automatically mean being internally available for meaningful interaction. Sometimes we need to be out from social engagement in order to be fully in with our inner work, our spiritual practice, or simply the restoration of our authentic self. This teaching also reveals our tendency to confuse physical presence with emotional or spiritual accessibility. How often do we assume that because someone is visible, they should automatically be available for our needs? How frequently do we ignore others' subtle signals that they need space simply because they haven't erected obvious barriers? Zen Master Yunmen taught, "Every day is a good day." This doesn't mean every day is appropriate for the same activities or interactions. Some days are good for engagement, others for solitude. Some moments call for availability, others for protective boundaries. Wisdom lies in recognizing which is needed when. We can observe this dynamic in countless modern situations. The parent who loves their children deeply but recognizes they need an hour of uninterrupted quiet time to remain emotionally available later. The artist who must protect their creative space from well-meaning friends who don't understand the delicate nature of inspiration. The spiritual practitioner who needs to establish boundaries around their meditation time, even if others consider it selfish or antisocial. The samurai's confusion reflects our cultural discomfort with boundaries that aren't immediately logical or convenient for others. We want people's availability to match our schedules and needs, rather than their own inner rhythms and requirements. When someone establishes a boundary that doesn't make sense to us, we often assume they're being arbitrary, unfriendly, or deceptive. This ancient wisdom illuminates another important distinction: the difference between isolation and conscious solitude. Master Sengai wasn't hiding from life or avoiding responsibility. He was claiming his right to be present with himself, to engage with his immediate environment without the overlay of social interaction and conversation. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that availability is a moral obligation rather than a conscious choice. We feel guilty for not being constantly accessible, as if our worth depends on our willingness to interrupt our own needs for others' convenience. This creates a pattern of resentment and depletion that ultimately makes us less genuinely available when authentic connection is possible. The story also points us toward understanding the power of clear, simple boundaries. Master Sengai didn't offer elaborate explanations or justifications for his unavailability. He didn't apologize or make excuses. He simply stated a fact. Today he was out from social engagement, and this was as true and valid as any other truth. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship with availability and boundaries, can you identify times when you might need to be out, even while physically present? What would it mean to honor your inner rhythms of engagement and solitude without guilt or extensive justification? The Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." Part of this self-love involves knowing when to be available to others and when to be available to yourself, trusting that both forms of presence serve the greater good. Our next story reveals the difference between knowledge and true awareness. This is the tale of the teacher who thought he had arrived. After a decade of intensive training under various masters, studying countless texts, and dedicating himself wholly to Zen practice, a monk named Tenno finally achieved what he had long sought: recognition as a qualified teacher. His understanding of Buddhist philosophy was profound. His meditation practice was deep and stable, and his ability to guide others had been tested and approved. He received the formal acknowledgement that he was ready to teach the Dharma and help others along the path of awakening. Proud of his accomplishment, and eager to learn from one of the most renowned masters of his time, Tenno decided to visit the famous Zen master Nan-in. The older teacher's reputation for wisdom and insight was legendary throughout the region, and Tenno looked forward to engaging in deep Dharma discussions and perhaps receiving some final polishing of his understanding. It was a rainy day when Tenno made his pilgrimage to Nanin's temple. The roads were muddy and slippery, puddles reflected the grey sky, and the steady rainfall required him to carry an umbrella to stay dry. When he reached the temple, he carefully removed his wooden clogs and placed them on the covered porch along with his umbrella, just as custom dictated. He arranged his outer robes, composed himself properly, and entered the temple to meet the great master. Nan-in received him graciously, bowing with the respect due to a fellow teacher while maintaining the dignity of his greater experience. They sat together in the simple receiving room, and Tenno expected their conversation to focus on sophisticated points of doctrine, subtle aspects of meditation technique, or perhaps the challenges of guiding students. Instead, after the initial pleasantries, Nanin asked what seemed like an absurdly mundane question. "I noticed you left your wooden clogs and umbrella on the porch when you entered. Tell me, did you place your umbrella to the left of your shoes or to the right?" Tenno was caught completely off guard. Of all the profound topics they could discuss, why was this renowned master asking about such a trivial detail? He tried to recall the moment he had arranged his belongings, but realized with growing dismay that he had no idea. He had been so focused on the importance of this meeting, so preoccupied with the impressive conversation he expected to have, that he had performed the simple act of arranging his belongings in complete unconsciousness. I don't know," Tenno admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment of confession, the full implications of his ignorance became clear to him. Here he was, a certified teacher of mindfulness and awareness, and he couldn't even remember a simple action he had performed just minutes earlier. Nanin smiled with infinite compassion, not mockery. "Then you have not yet attained full awareness," he said gently. "Someone who is truly awake pays complete attention to every moment, every action, every detail of experience. The way you arrange your belongings reflects the same quality of attention you bring to meditation, to teaching, to all of life." In that instant, Tenno's pride in his accomplishments crumbled, replaced by a humbling recognition of how much deeper his practice needed to go. He understood that true awareness isn't something you achieve once and then possess forever. It's a quality of attention that must be cultivated and maintained in every single moment, in the most ordinary activities as well as the most exalted spiritual practices. Without hesitation, Tenno requested to become Nanin's student. For the next 10 years, he studied under the master's guidance, learning to bring the same quality of conscious attention to placing his shoes that he brought to formal meditation, to treat the arrangement of an umbrella with the same reverence he showed to sacred texts. When he finally left Nanin's temple, he was a completely different kind of teacher, one who understood that enlightenment is not a destination, but a way of traveling, not an achievement, but a continuous practice of complete presence. As the Buddha observed, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true spiritual development is measured not by our peak experiences, but by the quality of attention we bring to ordinary moments. Why do we assume that enlightenment exists only in special circumstances, formal practices, or elevated states of consciousness? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is found precisely in our ability to be fully present for whatever is actually happening, whether it's sitting in meditation or simply placing an umbrella beside our shoes. Tenno's mistake was common among spiritual practitioners. He had developed the ability to be mindful during designated practice periods, but hadn't yet learned to extend that same quality of awareness to everyday activities. He could be present while sitting in meditation, but unconscious while performing simple tasks. This split between spiritual activities and ordinary activities is one of the most subtle traps on the path of awakening. We imagine that consciousness is something we turn on during meditation and turn off during mundane tasks. But true practice integrates awareness into every aspect of life. Consider your own daily routine. How present are you while brushing your teeth, making coffee, or putting on your shoes? Do you perform these activities with the same quality of attention you might bring to more important tasks? The gap between formal practice and informal practice often reveals where our awareness needs to deepen. Zen master Dogen taught, "Practice and enlightenment are one." This means that the quality of consciousness we cultivate in any moment is both the path and the destination. There's no separation between developing awareness and being aware. Every moment offers a complete opportunity for awakening. Nanin's question wasn't about umbrellas and shoes. It was about whether Tenno's spiritual development had penetrated into the cellular level of his daily existence. Could he maintain the same presence while performing unconscious habits that he brought to conscious spiritual practice? The Buddha said, "Mindfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. Those who are mindful do not die. Those who are heedless are as if dead already." True aliveness is found in complete presence, and complete presence can be cultivated in any activity, no matter how simple or mundane. Look deeply at your own relationship between formal practice and daily life. Where do you treat certain activities as worthy of attention, while others are performed on autopilot? This isn't about becoming obsessively focused on every tiny detail, but about recognizing that the same capacity for presence that serves us in meditation can transform every aspect of our lives. The paradox is that the most ordinary moments often offer the greatest opportunities for awakening. When we're sitting in formal meditation, we expect to be mindful. But when we're simply arranging our belongings or performing routine tasks, we have a chance to discover whether our practice has truly taken root or remains confined to special circumstances. In Zen temples, students are taught that washing dishes is as sacred as chanting sutras, that sweeping floors is as important as studying philosophy. This isn't because these activities are inherently special, but because the quality of consciousness we bring to any activity determines its spiritual value. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "Washing dishes is not only a way to have clean dishes. Washing dishes is also a way to live fully in each moment." This points to the fundamental teaching that Nanin was offering Tenno. Every action is an opportunity to practice complete presence. The master's question revealed that Tenno's decade of training had developed his capacity for awareness during designated practice periods, but hadn't yet integrated that awareness into the seamless flow of daily life. He could be conscious when he intended to be conscious, but he hadn't yet learned to make consciousness his default state. This integration is what distinguishes genuine spiritual maturity from mere spiritual knowledge. It's relatively easy to be mindful when we remember to be mindful. The deeper practice is developing the kind of natural awareness that operates whether we're thinking about it or not. Tonight, as you perform the simple actions that end your day, brushing your teeth, changing clothes, arranging items for tomorrow, can you bring the same quality of attention you might give to formal meditation? Can you discover whether your spiritual practice has penetrated into the unconscious habits that make up so much of daily life? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, every moment is a teacher and every place is a classroom. The umbrella beside the shoes was Tenno's teacher that day, revealing exactly where his practice needed to deepen. Sometimes the most profound lessons come disguised as the most ordinary questions, asked by masters wise enough to see that true awakening is found not in transcending the mundane, but in discovering the sacred hidden within it. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about true spiritual power. This is the tale of the miracle of ordinary living. At Ryumon Temple, the renowned Zen master Bankei was sharing the Dharma with a large gathering of devoted students. The hall was filled with people sitting in quiet attention, absorbing his simple yet profound teachings about living with natural awareness. The evening light filtered through the temple windows, creating an atmosphere of peace and contemplation. In the midst of his discourse, a disturbance arose near the back of the hall. A Shinshu priest, whose own temple had been losing followers to Bankai's growing reputation, pushed his way through the crowd with obvious agitation. His face was flushed with jealousy, and his movements were sharp with competitive energy. Bankai paused his teaching and looked toward the commotion with patient curiosity. "What is this noise that interrupts our evening together?" he asked gently, his voice carrying no irritation despite the disruption. The priest stood up boldly, his voice rising above the murmur of the crowd. "The founder of our sect," he boasted loudly, "had such miraculous powers that he held a brush in his hand on one bank of the river. His attendant held up a paper on the other bank, and the teacher wrote the holy name of Amida through the air. Can you do such a wonderful thing?" The gathered students turned their attention between the challenging priest and their teacher, curious how Bankei would respond to this test of his spiritual abilities. Some expected a demonstration of supernatural powers. Others wondered if their master would engage in debate. Bankai smiled, with the gentle amusement of someone who understood the priest's confusion completely. "Perhaps your fox can perform that trick," he replied lightly. "But that is not the manner of Zen. My miracle is that when I feel hungry, I eat, and when I feel thirsty, I drink." The temple fell into profound silence as the simple profundity of these words settled into the hearts of those present. The priest, expecting magical displays, found himself face to face with a teaching about the extraordinary nature of ordinary experience. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates how real spiritual power manifests not in supernatural demonstrations, but in complete presence to what is actually happening. Why do we seek the miraculous outside of our immediate experience? Zen Buddhism reveals our tendency to bypass the profound simplicity of life in search of dramatic spiritual experiences. We imagine enlightenment as something exotic, supernatural, or removed from daily existence, when in truth, it's the capacity to be fully present to whatever is arising. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that consciousness itself is the ultimate miracle. The fact that you can taste food, feel thirst, hear these words, or experience any sensation at all is more extraordinary than any magic trick. Yet, we take these everyday miracles for granted, while seeking special powers that would somehow validate our spiritual development. Look deeply at your own experience right now. Can you feel the miracle of breathing without having to think about it? The wonder of your heart beating steadily? The extraordinary fact that light enters your eyes and somehow becomes the vision of these words? These are the real miracles available in every moment. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the Zen understanding that we don't need to become someone special to access spiritual truth. We need to fully inhabit who we already are. The Buddha taught, there are only two mistakes one can make along the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. The path is not about developing supernatural abilities, but about going all the way into the simple reality of this moment, starting exactly where you are, with whatever you're experiencing right now. Consider how the priest's question revealed his own spiritual materialism, the belief that wisdom can be measured by impressive displays rather than by the quality of one's presence. This trap catches many seekers who mistake the extraordinary for the spiritual, when the truly spiritual is found in bringing complete attention to the ordinary. Tonight, as you eat your next meal or drink a glass of water, can you taste the miracle that Bankai pointed to? Can you experience the wonder of simple biological processes that sustain your life? As the Buddha said, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. The miracles we seek are not above us, but within the simple reality of being alive. Our next story reveals how liberation comes not from achieving something new, but from recognizing what was never born and can never die. This is the teaching of freedom from birth and death. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted on the spring breeze, a dedicated student named Goshu approached the wise Zen master Yue. For years, Goshu had been practicing meditation, studying texts, and following all the prescribed methods of spiritual development. Yet despite his sincere efforts, he felt no closer to the enlightenment he desperately sought. Goshu bowed respectfully before his teacher, his face showing the strain of prolonged spiritual seeking. "Master, I have been studying Zen for many years, following every instruction, sitting in meditation daily, reading the ancient texts. But I have not yet succeeded. I feel as lost as when I began. Please give me some guidance. What am I missing? What more must I do?" Yue looked at his earnest student with compassion, seeing the weight of spiritual ambition that had become a burden rather than a path to freedom. He understood that Goshu's very effort to achieve enlightenment had become the obstacle to recognizing his inherent awakeness. "There is no secret trick to Zen study," Yue said simply. "It's just a matter of freedom from birth and death." Goshu's brow furrowed with confusion. This answer seemed to make his quest even more daunting. "Master, how does one pass through birth and death to freedom? That sounds like the most difficult task of all. If I cannot even quiet my mind for a few minutes, how can I transcend birth and death?" Yui's eyes brightened, and he raised his voice with sudden intensity. "Your every passing thought is birth and death." At these words, something shifted dramatically in Goshu's understanding. Like a veil suddenly lifted, he saw that what he had been seeking as some future attainment was actually the very nature of his present experience. The constant arising and passing away of thoughts, sensations, and emotions. This endless flow was not something to escape, but the very freedom he had been pursuing. Goshu went into ecstasy, feeling as if he had put down a heavy burden he he didn't even realize he had been carrying. The relief was profound and immediate. All his years of struggling to become something special dissolved into the recognition that he had never been anything other than the aware space in which all experience appears and disappears. As the Buddha observed, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. What emerges from this story is the recognition that we suffer not because we lack something, but because we don't recognize the freedom that is our fundamental nature. Why do we carry the heavy burden of spiritual becoming? Zen Buddhism points to our identification with the content of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. We mistake ourselves for the stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations, instead of recognizing ourselves as the aware space in which this stream flows. Every thought that arises is born. Every thought that fades away dies. Every emotion emerges from nowhere and dissolves back into nowhere. Every sensation appears and disappears. This constant birth and death happening in awareness is not a problem to solve, but the very movement of life itself. The deeper understanding here reveals that what we call birth and death are simply names we give to the natural flowing of experience. When we identify with the flow, we suffer the anxiety of constant change. When we recognize ourselves as the awareness in which the flow appears, we discover unshakable peace. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This points to the extraordinary fact that the enlightenment we seek is not hidden in special states, but in the ordinary awareness that knows every state. The same awareness that knows anxiety also knows peace. The same awareness that knows confusion also knows clarity. The Buddha said, "In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. Our spiritual seeking often creates the very problem it attempts to solve by imagining that some states of consciousness are spiritual while others are mundane. Consider how much energy you invest in trying to have better thoughts, more peaceful emotions, or more pleasant experiences. Each effort to improve the content of consciousness reinforces the belief that you are that content, rather than the awareness that witnesses it all with equal presence. In Japanese Zen, there is a teaching called just sitting, or shikantaza. This practice involves recognizing that the sitting itself is enlightenment, rather than a method to achieve enlightenment. Similarly, your current awareness, exactly as it is the freedom you seek, rather than a stepping stone to freedom. Tonight, as thoughts arise and pass away in your awareness, can you recognize the birth and death that UEA pointed to? Can you see that you are not the thoughts that come and go, but the unchanging awareness in which they appear? As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. The salvation is not in perfecting the conditioned, but in recognizing the unconditioned awareness that you already are. Let us continue on our journey with a story about discovering the source of true freedom. This is the tale of the student and the master's heart. In a peaceful monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted like snow, a young student approached his teacher during evening meditation. The master sat beneath an ancient maple tree, twilight painting the sky in soft purples and golds. This student had been practicing earnestly for years, yet lately questions had been arising that reached deeper than formal instruction. Taking a seat beside his teacher, the the student gathered courage to voice what had been troubling him. "Master," he began quietly, "when I was young, I had a deep desire for my family and loved ones to be proud of me. I wanted to excel in studies, to accomplish things that would make them beam with joy. Were you ever the same way?" The master turned his gentle gaze toward the student, seeing in the young man's eyes the same earnest longing that had once driven his own seeking. After contemplative silence, he replied simply, "Yes, I was very much the same." The student felt relief at this admission. "Why did you desire their pride so intensely?" he asked. "What was driving that need for approval?" The master smiled with tender recognition. "I wanted them to feel they had more reason to love and accept me," he said thoughtfully. "If I could make them proud, surely their love would be secure and abundant. But the reason I desired this went even deeper." The student leaned closer, sensing they were approaching something essential. "I sought their love so desperately," the master continued, "because I, in turn, would feel I had sufficient reason to love and accept myself. I was seeking permission from others to feel good about who I was. Their approval would be evidence of my worthiness even to myself. That was what lay at the root of all my striving." The master paused, watching the first stars appear. "But then one day, I awakened to a revolutionary possibility. I realized I could ask myself a different question. What if I could bypass all external validation and simply learn to love and accept myself unconditionally? What if I didn't require anyone else's approval to feel genuinely good about my existence?" The student felt something shift in his chest as these words settled. "I imagined what it would be like if my happiness no longer depended on outer circumstances, on whether people approved or disapproved of my choices. What if my sense of worth could be as constant as my own heartbeat, independent of any external validation?" The student could feel his teacher's words pointing toward a freedom he had never considered. "And that realization began your quest for self-realization?" "Exactly," the master nodded. "That was when my true spiritual journey began, not with seeking something outside myself, but with discovering what was already complete within." After contemplative silence, the student asked, "And did you never again desire their pride? Did that longing completely disappear?" The master chuckled softly. "Oh, my ego certainly continued to desire approval. Conditioned patterns don't vanish overnight, but something fundamental had shifted in my relationship to those desires. I no longer completely identified with my ego as I had before." He gestured toward the darkening garden, where fireflies had begun their dance. "I learned to see those approval-seeking thoughts as passing phenomena, like these fireflies appearing and disappearing. I could observe them with interest and compassion, but I no longer gave them power to determine my worth." "So you still cared what others thought?" the student asked. "I respected their opinions and honored their perspectives," the master replied. "But I no longer gave them so much weight. Their approval became like weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not, but no longer the determining factor in whether I felt at peace with myself." The master's face radiated quiet joy. "And never had I felt so free as when I finally released myself in this way. It was like discovering I had been carrying invisible chains for decades, and suddenly they fell away. The love I had been seeking outside was revealed to have been within me all along." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you truly loved yourself, you would never hurt yourself with destructive thoughts, actions, or choices. This teaching points to the heart of the master's discovery. Most suffering stems from the mistaken belief that we must earn the right to love ourselves through external achievements or approval. Here, we discover one of the most revolutionary insights available. Self-love is not a reward to be earned, but our natural birthright to be claimed. We are born complete and worthy, not because of what we accomplish, but simply because we exist. Why do we find unconditional self-love so difficult? From childhood, we absorb messages suggesting love must be earned through good behavior, achievement, or pleasing others. We learn to treat ourselves the way we were treated, often with criticism and conditions. These patterns become so familiar that unconditional self-acceptance feels foreign. Our culture intensifies this conditioning by promoting the myth that happiness comes from external sources. Each message reinforces the delusion that we are incomplete as we are. Consider how much mental energy goes toward managing others' opinions. How often do you modify authentic expression to gain approval? How much self-worth depends on external feedback rather than internal recognition of inherent value? When we love ourselves unconditionally, we create a foundation of fulfillment that allows us to enjoy others' affection without depending on it. We can receive compliments with gratitude rather than desperate hunger, and handle criticism without devastation, because our core worth remains untouched. The Buddha said, "You can search throughout the entire universe for someone more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You, yourself, deserve your love and affection." This isn't narcissism. It's recognition of fundamental truth about consciousness itself. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's quiet, can you sense the presence that is reading these words? This awareness that knows your thoughts and witnesses your experiences is not improved or diminished by anything that happens. It remains constant and clear, like space itself. What would it be like to treat this aware presence with the tenderness it deserves? Perhaps you could offer yourself the same patience you'd give a beloved child learning, or the same compassion you'd feel for a friend in difficulties. As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. Self-criticism is never healed by more self-criticism. Only by learning to love ourselves exactly as we are do we create inner conditions for authentic transformation. In discovering this unconditional love within, we find the freedom we sought through others' approval was always here, beating steadily in our own hearts. Tonight, as we bring our time together to a gentle close, can you feel how the calm you've discovered isn't something you need to chase or create, but rather something that was quietly waiting for your attention all along? Can you sense that the deep rest you've touched through these stories isn't separate from who you are, but is actually your natural state when the mind finally stops struggling? The Buddha reminded us, the present moment is the only time over which we have dominion. As you reflect on this truth, notice that the freedom and clarity you've experienced tonight don't require perfect conditions or endless effort. They emerge naturally when you simply allow yourself to be here, fully present, without needing anything to be different than it is. Each story we've shared has revealed the same profound understanding from different angles. That suffering dissolves when we stop fighting what is. That genuine freedom comes not from controlling our experience, but from changing how we relate to it. And that lasting peace is found in the simple act of letting go. Even when difficulties arise in the days ahead, even when your mind becomes busy again, the wisdom you've absorbed tonight has taken root in your understanding, ready to guide you back to this place of rest whenever you need it. As you prepare to drift into sleep, remember that these ancient teachings haven't shown you something foreign or complicated, but have simply reminded you of what you already know deep down. In the stillness that surrounds you now, feel how your breathing has naturally slowed, how your thoughts have settled, and how your entire being rests in quiet contentment. These timeless insights are not locked away in distant monasteries or hidden in complex philosophies. They live in the simple moments when you pause, breathe, and notice what's actually here. Tonight, you've touched that truth directly, experiencing the peace that's always available when we stop looking elsewhere for what we already have. May this deep tranquility stay close to you, offering comfort during busy days and restful ease during quiet nights. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.